right. Welcome to the American Association for Respiratory Care's Perspectives podcast, live from Congress 2025. I'm Lisa Weisenberger, AARC Director of Engagement and Media, and I'm here this morning with Lynda Goodfellow, AARC Director of Clinical Practice Guidelines. Thanks, Lynda, for joining us today. Lynda, to begin, can you tell us a little background on what roles clinical practice guidelines play in respiratory care and why it is important for respiratory therapists to be familiar with them?
Thank you, Lisa. And yes, I'm happy to talk about CPGs. And CPG is an abbreviation for Clinical Practice Guidelines. And we use CPGs to develop recommendations for clinicians to help provide better and the most possible best care for patients. So they're based on a systematic review on the latest research evidence, weighing the benefits and the harms of these different treatment options, so that we can guide clinicians into making the best decision-making possible for them when they're at the bedside needing an answer for how to treat this patient. So the goal of the CPGs is to improve the quality of care, reduce unnecessary interventions, and standardize practice. And this is very important as we need evidence-based recommendations published by organizations like the American Association for Respiratory Care. CPGs help guide respiratory therapists making their own informed decisions for optimal patient care in areas like oxygen therapy, mechanical ventilation, pulse oximetry, and humidification, for example. And this is to ensure standardization because the more that we standardize our care, the higher quality that the guidelines can provide, and this is discussed throughout the evidence. So we know that this is one way to improve the quality of patient care.
Great. That was super informative. It takes some time for CPGs to be developed. Can you tell us how that process works and how CPGs get selected to be developed?
So you're right. It does take time. And the reason for the time that we are taking is that we want to be sure that the clinical practice guideline that we create is trustworthy. The process includes forming a team of individuals to be on a guideline panel. The team then forms questions that they believe can provide answers to questions or gaps in their practice. And this becomes the footprint for a literature search once we know what the questions are. The librarians, they will search for the literature, and once that's found, then we use a tool called Covidence, and the librarians, they enter the titles and abstracts into Covidence, and our teams begin to screen the abstracts and titles to determine which may be helpful to them as we go through the full text review and making recommendations. So once the data is input in and is complete, then we use another tool called Gray Crow, and this helps us with analyzing the bias that may be involved in our papers, as well as helping us with coming to a recommendation. So CPG topics are selected from gaps in the literature, or they come from reading that I have read or others tell me about, that other authors have written about, and the needs for more research. Another method is to update a CPG, as it has been more than 5 years since the last CPG on that topic was published. So that's how, I can't say that there's a true methodology to how the topics come. Sometimes they just fall in my lap. Other times people say, hey, we need a CPG on this, and I'll take a look at it. And then definitely we are updating the past guidelines to more current information.
So what are some of the recent CPGs that have been completed, and how are they making an impact on respiratory care because they're so important?
Yeah, so you may recall that we have published 3 CPGs in the past 2 years, one on pediatric critical asthma, also a paper on spontaneous breathing trials, and then patient ventilator assessment. So what we are in the process now, there is a CPG on home oxygen. It is in the very final process of being sort of cleaned up and putting it into the format that respiratory care requires to submit a paper. Same thing for a topic of pulse oximetry. I suspect that by the end of this year or early January, both those 2 topics will be submitted to respiratory care for review. Early next year, we'll have the second paper on a spontaneous breathing trial as well as patient ventilator assessment, because those are in the very almost final stage, but, say 95% to be done. But I want to talk about really what the impact these CPGs have had. And so on the Marianne Liebert Sage website that all of us go to whenever we're wanting to read respiratory care, there are metrics that have been provided, and this is very telling in terms of how impactful the CPGs are becoming. For instance, the Pediatric Critical Care paper that was published in May of 2025, that paper has over 9,000 downloads. It's amazing. You look at the spontaneous breathing trial that was published in July of 2024, that has over 3,500 downloads. And the patient ventilator assessment published in August of 2024, that has over 3,000 downloads. And not only are these metrics very telling, but also Sage, the new article processing company that we're all familiar with, yes, they tell us what the 20 most read papers are in respiratory care, and 6 of the CPGs are in the top 20 most read papers in respiratory care. So obviously this is making an impact because people want to download, they want to read these articles. And I'm very happy to be a part of all of this because truly I had no idea that this would take off like fire. And then the last thing about the impact, the teams that we have in place now, there are 8 active ones. Probably, like I said, 2 or 3, 4 of them will go off by the summer of next year. But from these guidelines that we are working on to date, there have been over 100 recommendations for faculty, for clinicians, faculty who are teaching and education programs as well. So it's been, it is a long time to make, but we're doing it right. And I think the metrics here are telling us that we're doing it right.
Wow, that's super impressive, like all those downloads and the impact that the CPGs are really making. What are some upcoming CPG updates that RTs can expect in the next year?
So according to the AARC strategic plan, I do 3 new guidelines a year. And so there'll be 3 new ones coming up. I don't have the topics yet. We just finished starting a new topic on transcutaneous monitoring just last month. So I needed a little time to get all that processed and get the team going forward with their work. So probably we'll have a new team begin late March or early April, then another one during the summertime, and then one in the fall. So that's sort of the schedule that we've been using this year. So I don't have the topics yet, but if anyone listening here, if you have an idea for a topic, I'll give my email address out at the end here, and so you can just email me with the topic. But I do encourage you to look at the CPGs, and really the CPGs are on our AERC website, and they're also found in respiratory care. And so that's the best way to find them.
So how can respiratory therapists use CPGs to improve patient outcomes and ensure high quality care? That's a big question, I know.
And it is a big question. And, we already have a tool that we're using or we should be using, and that's the use of protocols. Protocols in respiratory care first started over 30 years ago. And so that has been a great tool to really get to the evidence-based medicine that we should be thinking of and using. So protocols can assist with providing therapy that's evidence-based respiratory care. Also, policy should be in place that allows for only evidence-based therapy, which means not providing unnecessary therapy. If you're looking at the evidence, that's what you should be doing. Even though your practice for the past 20 years, you've been doing a procedure this way, if there's evidence to show that that's not up to date or that it's not the best practice anymore, then you should change. You're doing unnecessary therapy in my mind. So this is how RTs can add value to the patient, to their department or their clinic, wherever they may be in practice, and also their own practice. It will be better and more fulfilling, I would say as well, whenever you know that you're doing the best that you can for a patient who's in need.
So how are CPGs incorporated into respiratory therapy education and training to ensure that everybody's up to date when they get out of school?
That is also a big question. So educators, they should be incorporating CPGs into their curriculum. And I know that the curricula for all, no matter what level you are, associate, bachelor's or master's, there is a lot of content that you have to provide and include and be sure that students are competent in that. So one of the ways to do that is not to set up a new course, a CPG course. I don't recommend that at all because that's just adding more work to a student in terms of going to another class or taking another course. What is important is that educators begin to give some homework assignments that include CPGs. Maybe you ask the student, you are to create a protocol on oxygen therapy, something very simple to begin with, but then that will help them understand why protocols are important in their practice. It has been known that a lot of educators, and this goes into medical school as well, they don't include a lot of CPGs in their curricula. They think they're not going to need this. If we do teach it, they'll forget it because they're not using it. But that does the student, regardless of the discipline here, a disservice because once they get into their practice, they don't know what a CPG is because it's never been taught to them. So I really encourage the faculty incorporate at least into 4 of their main courses: mechanical ventilation, a patient assessment, and neonatal work. If you're doing you're in a bachelor's level and have a neonatal course, I mean, it doesn't take a lot of work to have an assignment or 2 on clinical practice guidelines.
So any other thoughts you'd like to add? That's super insightful of how everything's developed and what they get used for. What else would you like to add for the listeners today?
Well, I thank you for listening and taking the time to join and listen to the podcast here. But for future reference, I guess my main message that I have is and ask those who are listening, if you would like to perhaps join a CPG team in the future, please send me your resume or your CV to my email address. And that is Lynda, Lynda, Lynda.Goodfellow. And I always have to spell Goodfellow because many people think I'm in the movie, but I wasn't. It's GOODFELLOW at AARC.org. So Lynda.Goodfellow@AARC.org.
Thanks, Lynda, for joining us today and shedding some light on clinical practice guidelines and what's on the horizon for 2026. It's super exciting. Be sure to subscribe to the AARC Perspectives podcast to stay up to date on the latest news and stories in respiratory care.